Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social Podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the 7th round of the Cyclocross World Cup which took place in Val di Sole, and I'm coming to you from Val di Sole. Ciao, Issam.
Ciao, Noah. Thank you for having me.
Was a good day out, was pretty interesting, and for once the women's race was more interesting than the men's race. I think that is pretty much a first this season. The men's race was a dominant display by Joris Nieuwenhuis. He took the fastest start, and as there was carnage behind him, he steamed away into the distance. For the first 2-3 laps, Niels van der Putten, the snowman, was able to stay relatively close to him, but in the second half of the race, Nieuwenhuis expanded his gap to over a minute. He took his first ever World Cup win ahead of Niels van der Putten, who ended second, just like last year. The third place went to Joran Wyseure. That was his first World Cup podium after an interesting battle. In the first half of the race, he was fighting against the likes of Laurens Week, Michael van Toerenhout, Eli Iserbyt, Kevin Kuhn, Toon van der Bos. But, well, I think it was around the halfway mark that he took the lead and just steamed away into the distance. He ended third. At some point, it even looked like he might still challenge for second, but that was not the case. Wyseure ended third. Win for Nieuwenhuis, Issam. He was already strong last weekend when he took the win in Boom. He was not that fresh the day after in Flamanville, but today in Val di Sole he took the win. I must say it surprised me a little bit. He was not that great during the pre-ride. He crashed quite a lot, but during the race he was completely fine. He didn't make any mistakes, well maybe one on the steep uphill where he slipped, but for the rest he was super good and super powerful as well. I think that's maybe what made the biggest difference today, the power for Nieuwenhuis.
I think the combination of, not making many mistakes and just being in total control, and also really utilize the power where you can and where you should, actually. And I think that first lap definitely set the tone for the race, and it definitely, helped him and his case for of winning the race. And I think that, that some of the riders that could have been maybe a little bit closer today just were too far behind at the beginning of the race. Maybe were a bit surprised by that very fast first lap of Nieuwenhuis. It was basically only Van der Putten that was close, and for the rest there was already quite a gap, and the others had to react, and before they knew it was already 30 seconds almost. So you already kind of know that it's going to be a difficult task for those riders to even get close. But Nieuwenhuis today, dominant performance, very good, very strong, and he got a course maybe that was different from the reckoning, and today just utilized his strengths very well and made sure that that he was the best in Val di Sole at the men's race.
Oh yeah, the conditions I would say were the reason that he won. There's no such thing as a snow cross. There's so many different variants of snow. Last year when we were racing here in Val di Sole, there was an ice ring. It was super fast. But this year it was completely different. There was 5 centimeters of fresh snow overnight when the women were doing their course reckons, and also for a large part of their race. It was basically like a sandpit, but then of snow across the entire course. There were ruts everywhere. There was nowhere where you could put the power down. But when the men started, the temperatures they were slightly above zero. It was slightly higher, and the course got extremely rutted. It was basically single file everywhere. There was one rut where even the snow was completely gone. You were just riding on the frozen underground. It was fast again, but then different fast from last year, because last year it was super slippery. The fact that there was a single file across the entire course, or most of the course, meant that start was super crucial. If you think about the sandpit in Ruddervoorde this year, we had Michael van Toerenhout lead into it. He was super slow, but the riders in second couldn't pass him. Why? Van Toerenhout was blocking the rut. If you carry more speed but steer into the loose sand next to it, you slow yourself down and you need to go back into the rut. That's similar today in Val di Sole. Look at Cameron Mason. He had a horrendous start. He was way back. He fought his way back to 11th, but it was super difficult because on a straight, where you can normally pass somebody if you have more power, you're basically still stuck behind them because you're riding in that trail. There were very limited sections where you could actually move out of that and really overtake someone. There was one line, and apart from that good start, it also just helped that you could put the power down there. We'll come to talk about the women's race in a bit, but you couldn't really put the power down there. If you look at the rider who ended second, Niels van der Putten, he is 100% a rider that would have preferred the conditions to be as they were when he reckoned, as they were when the women raced. He's a rider who has the technical skills, is super good in the snow. He was second here last year. Second here again, I think he can be reasonably satisfied with that. But he will also be thinking, damn, if those conditions had just been sticking around for a little bit longer, I could have even won my first World Cup here.
I definitely think that if the conditions were just that little more slippery and treacherous, I think that then for Van der Putten he would have had more of a chance, because then it also it limits the amount of power that you can put into a course and into certain sections, and it kind of limits that ability of a rider, and then you have to lean more towards your technical abilities. And I think that for Van der Putten that probably would have been a benefit for him and for several other riders that we would have maybe expected them to be a little bit better today. But it's just, I have to say that the course of today, I liked it a little bit more than the circumstances and the course of last year. I think that today it was closer to cyclocross in a way, and it was, apart from the racing itself, which was at a certain point a bit, everything was already kind of in its place. We were kind of, just enjoying the scenery more than the racing itself, but it was still great to watch. And I think that in the end, the circumstances just today, I liked it a little bit more, because I felt that it was more rideable, especially on the men's side. In the women's side, we still saw some running going on there instead of staying on the bike, which nothing wrong with it, but, that's something to point out. And it had a mix of both things. You still could make the mistakes, but you also could, like a Nieuwenhuis, just, make sure that you stay just under the limit and have a clean race as possible. And he did that, and Van der Putten probably would have been a little bit better if it was more treacherous, but this was the course that we got, and he still held his own pretty well and got a very well-deserved second place.
There's, I guess, few races where the conditions are so changeable as here in Val di Sole, and yes, I do like the course this year a bit better than it was in the previous 2 years. I think it's good that they took out that big climb at the back. It didn't add too much. A bit more of the technical section on the other side of the river with the barriers there also really gave a reason for spectators to go there. So I think it added something. But at the end of the day, the riders just need to face the conditions as they are. And of course, there's exceptions. If it's a speed skating ring and it's too dangerous, then of course something needs to be done. You can either put gasoline on it as they did in Poprad for Worlds and then light it on fire to burn it, or you cancel the race, or you find other ways forward. But when there is snow overnight, there's not that much you can do. They do their best here to prepare the course, to keep it safe. Yesterday it was shoveled. The conditions were different than they were today. But then if there's snow overnight, if there's snow overnight in Belgium, they're not going to shove the course either. They're just going to say, well, this is it. We're going to race in it like it was in Lille. And there used to be quite a few snow races every year. I remember a year Hogerheide was snowy and icy. That was actually a pretty icy race. Surprising. I think that was in 2013, before Louisville Worlds. Louisville Worlds had melting snow. It's always interesting to see what the conditions bring, but I would say, well, as long as it's safe, you need to face it, and I wouldn't be the way Richard Groenendaal is. He was here today for, I think, Belgian TV, and then when he was walking around in the morning, he said, there's no way that they can ride on this. They need to put the snow scooters on. They need to shove the snow away. Lap times are too long. I would say you just need to deal with it and take it on, and it was safe. And we'll talk about that women's race where the conditions were a bit more difficult in a bit. But first we need to talk about Joran Wyseure, because what a ride, Issam. Third place. He was really cooking in that second part of the race. He was chefing it up, moving away from that big group with Sweek, Iserbiet, Kuhn, Van Toerenhout, Van der Bos, and then steaming to his first World Cup podium. He really has that forward momentum going after that fourth place in Dublin earlier this month.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you need to have the guts to do that with the guys that he was in that group. And, he did that. And I think it was, like you said, it's just that momentum that he has at the moment that probably persuaded him to make that attack and try to go for it. And he made that stick. His confidence in the later part of the race was very good, and he just made sure that it's always a bit tricky when you make such an attack, because then your heart rate goes a little bit more up. The mistakes can creep in a little bit, but he held it clean, and I think that was the most important part of that attack, and just making sure that when you make the gap, also make sure that they are not able to catch back again, because we have seen some guys go and try to break away, and then they kind of fall back because of a multitude of mistakes in a very, very short period of time. And I think that he didn't do that. Very good job from his side, and he made a step this season. Last season it was a bit more difficult for him, and I think this season you can definitely see that he's feeling more and more comfortable with the elites, and it looks very good and very promising in the way he has been going at it this season so far.
Let's look at the entire top 10 then. Behind the podium of Nieuwenhuis, Van der Putten and Wyseure, we find European champion Michael van Torenhout ahead of Elisabeth and Laurens Zweek. Then the Swiss duo of Kuhn and Rueg ended in 7th and 8th, ahead of Ryan Kamp, and 10th place was for Toon van der Bos. I think for a couple of riders in the top 10, we can clearly see that they are not on the greatest of form levels at the moment. Van Torenhout, he crashed badly in Kortrijk, still seems to be suffering a bit from that. Zweek doesn't really have it this season. And Kuhn in 7th, well, I would not say it's super disappointing, but at the same time, it's not really the Kuhn we saw earlier in the season when he was fighting for the podium in Ruddervoorde. And, well, the same Kuhn we saw towards the end of last season, where he was also fighting for top 5 positions and took the podium here in Val di Sole. All these three riders is something they don't really see on their best form at the moment. Do you think that can change?
Everything can change, so I think there's always hope. We are at that part of the season where it definitely can change, on a serious note. I think that there is some of the riders have planned their travels already to Spain. So I think that such a week or 2 weeks can definitely make a difference for someone's form during a season. And I think that, we have to wait that out a little bit and see how you can, use that couple of weeks of training in a training camp, nice with good weather under the sun in Spain, and really enjoy yourself a little bit. For some, it's kind of a recharge moment. For others, it's more a moment where they try to still get some intensive training in. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can bounce back from it. But normally in a regular season, you always have these fluctuations in shape, and I don't think at the moment that there is a reason for panic. But it's, especially if you talk about a guy like Kuhn today, was in my opinion a guy that definitely could have been a little higher up than he finished today. I think that if you would have asked me his result before the race, regardless of the results that he had before, then I would have probably predicted him within the top 5. And he was just today, you could clearly see that he was just not able to to bring such a result up. So I think that we have to be patient with these guys, and it can always turn around and it can always change. So we have to wait and see how that will play out.
Next on my list to discuss are Timon Rueg and Cameron Mason. I pretty much already summed up the fact that Cameron Mason had difficulties moving forward through the field, and the same kind of went for Timon Rueg. This is a rider who I had expected a little bit more from than an 8th place, even though it's not bad. But Rueg in the first lap was caught up in some carnage as well. Then he almost crashed in the steep downhill. He managed to avoid that, but lost a couple of places. And then at the steep run-up, he made a judgment error. The riders in front of him were already dismounting, but he thought, well, if I fly up the middle of the climb, I can maybe overtake all of them. But there were a couple of people throwing their bikes out there as well, and their dismounts, he ran into one, almost slid down back the hill, needed to catch his bike again, and could start chasing from like 28th or something. That was a bad starting position for him, and then the same went for him as for Mason. Very difficult to move forward, so I would say, considering all of that, 8th isn't terrible. He managed to overtake Ryan Kamp in the final lap. Issam, Ryan Kamp, we have discussed quite a bit that a couple of riders are in their contract seasons. Ryan Kamp was one of them, And Paul Sauze has decided to not extend his contract. He said in an interview to Wielerflits that he was relatively close to signing with a new team. We both suspect that will be one of the Roodhoofd teams. But do you understand that decision by Paul Sauze to not renew his contract? Because Kamp, he was their star boy, he was their golden boy. They decided to keep him rather than Pim Ronhaar a couple of seasons ago. And now they just say, well, we're not really going to go for you. We're going to focus on our U23 Scorsese and Van den Bergen.
Well, yeah, I mean, they were talking about things budget related, and in a way I can kind of understand it, because they probably think or assume that the guys that they have in the under 23 are guys that could reach a similar level of Kamp right now and maybe could become the new stars of Paul Sauze. And in a way I think it's a good decision by Paul Sauze, because I don't think it's a good idea to have a rider sign him a 1 or 2 year contract while you kind of know already that you don't really want him, that is just, he's not really part of your long-term vision. And I think that was just the whole issue in that situation, that Kamp just did not fit in the long-term vision of Mette Penning and Paul Sauze. And I don't think that there is something wrong with it. It's the end of a contract, and they felt that it was not, that is not necessary to extend. And for Kamp, it seems like it's not a big issue. I think it was Camille van den Berg as well who said that it was not going to be a big issue, and that a new team is there or thereabouts. So I think that it's, he's not lost right now. Most likely, like you said, Roodhoofd is going to sign him and put him in one of his 1,000 satellite teams, and he's just going to have enjoy his career there and see what he can do there. And as he said, and rightfully so, I mean, he's going to probably have a bit better road campaign in the summer. So it's that is always something that is a benefit if you ride for the Roodhoofd brothers. So it might actually be a move that could help him more than harm him. So it's going to be interesting to see how that will play out.
I don't know how much more road racing he will be able to do, because it's not like he didn't do anything at Paul Sauze. Although, yeah, I mean, the Alpecin Dev team does ride a bit more than what the Paul Sauze team does, but it will still be the same level of racing. And I think ultimately at Paul Sauze they will be kind of torn, because Kamp was their star boy. They invested quite a bit in him. They made the decision to let Ronhaar go, despite, I think, 1 year left on his deal. At some point it was just the point, are we keeping Kamp or keeping Ronhaar? They went for Kamp, and look where Ronhaar is now. I don't think that Kamp has progressed quite the way they want, but it's still interesting, because what else can you expect from a second-year elite? He's only missed the top 10 twice this season, was 5th at the European Championships, has a couple of other pretty decent top 10 results. So it's interesting, but at the same time, Scorsese seems to be a pretty big talent, so they're probably wanting to free some wage budget so they can potentially keep him, because I can't imagine that other teams will want to pick him up once his U23 Neo deal expires. But as you say, I don't think for Kamp it will be much of an issue now that he's found another team. And you mentioned Camille van den Berg, that's his trainer. Camille van den Berg is also the coach of the 777 team, or the Cyclocross Reds. So yeah, that should hopefully work out, and it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up at those Cyclocross Reds, considering that. Then we'll mention, for a rider outside of the top 10, Lars Sommer, racing for Heizelmat Radsport team. Very impressive race by him. He was in the top 10 for quite a while, and that's not a place where this U23 rider is actually supposed to be. In the U23 races, he struggles to make the top 15, but he was flying in the snow today, and for some riders it's just a great equalizer, and Sommer was one of them. He faded a bit in the second part of the race, but still managed to finish 12th, which is a great result for him. One of the riders he kept behind him was Thijs Aerts, the only rider to do the double weekend. He raced in Essen yesterday, and you saw him race there, Issam. He went pretty well there, but couldn't really match Wout van Aert there, could he?
I was a bit surprised when I heard it, that after the race that he was going to catch a plane and have his appearance as well in Val di Sole. And in Essen it was it was a difficult conditions. definitely not similar to the conditions that we had in Val di Sole. You know, it was muddy, Belgian weather. There was some wind. It was cold. It was it was tough. And I mean, it was for Thijs, it was a very, very good outing from his side. I think that he kept his own very well. You had him, Jens Adams, Lander Looks, and of course Wout van Aert. And I think with those four, those were really the four that colored the first half of the race. And then at a certain point, Van Aert, really the way Van Aert would do it normally, decided to make a break for it. And they didn't see him again after that moment. And, there he went, I would say. And behind him, it was kind of a battle for second. Jens Adams and Thijs Aerts. Lander Looks, I think, was a bit too ambitious at the start of the race and just, couldn't really find those legs that he had in the beginning. And, Adams played it very smart and was definitely the one that deserved the second place the most and had it in the legs to get, to bring himself to a second place. And Thijs Aerts, then had to kind of defend off Lander Looks, made some small mistakes, but was able to hold on and then got that third place. And then, behind him, it was, to be honest, not only behind him, I think when Wout van Aert crossed the line, all the Belgian media already went to get a glimpse of Van Aert, and it was a bit of a shame because I think when Adams crossed the line, there were only like 3 or 2 camera guys compared to the 20 that were standing there. So, yeah, it's, it was the Van Aert show in Essen, and it was, Van Aert delivered, showed that he was able to, he still has it, that cyclocross kind of ability, and it looked very good. He got a course that really suited him well. So it's, it's going to be interesting to see how he will develop over the course of the season. But I think that if you look at his level right now, I think it's right up there with the best, if not a little better.
It's probably a bit early to really see what his level is. His reasoning for not doing Worlds, however, is that he doesn't want to peak at the first weekend of February. So I'm kind of reading between the lines that if he doesn't need to peak and can just keep his level consistent, there is still a super slim chance that he decides to race there. But we will see. Obviously, was much stronger than the rest, as we would expect. And I mean, Van Aert, you said it was the Van Aert show. Van Aert saved that race in Essen, because if you look at the rest of that top 10, I mean, all the respect for the riders that are racing, but for a TV cross in Belgium, the level is really, really, really low. I mean, if you look at the back of the top 10 with Clément Horny, Thomas Verheijen and Wout Jansen, these are not riders that are normally near that level. And again, all the respect to them, but without Van Aert, I don't think those 20 camera crews would have even showed up, and those 3 left behind for Jens Adams, I don't know if they would even be there. So, yeah, it's difficult for a race like Essen. I don't think it's necessarily a bad development that a couple of these races in Belgium end up with significantly less start fields. I mean, if you want to go internationally, we'll at some point have to cut into the lower end races, and Essen is definitely one of them. Not really a fan of the course there. But, yeah, I mean, it's at the same time a nice opportunity for a couple of other riders to score points, get their name mentioned on the broadcast, and also just measure themselves against some high-level riders like Vincent Baastans and Tom Meeuwse. Then back to Val di Sole, where we had a pretty entertaining women's race, one that was actually decided in the final lap for once. At the start, Alvarado had the best start, but in the first corner, or the first off-road corner, she crashed. It was the second corner and she found herself in third. It was nothing major. Behind there was a lot of running and Casasola took the lead. Corvi was in front of Alvarado. But in the second half of the first lap, it was Zemanova who took the front. She drilled it and put Alvarado on a distance. She was gapped. Alvarado managed to close that gap and Zemanova followed for a while, but it quickly became clear that Alvarado had the upper hand compared to Zemanova. That was without Manon Bakker, because Bakker at the end of the first lap closed the gap to Alvarado and Zemanova, then got dropped again. But in the second lap, Bakker overtook Zemanova, who had been dropped by Alvarado. Bakker kept going, but Alvarado seemed to be in control. The gap was around 10-15 seconds, but the turning point came around the halfway point of the race. There, Alvarado started to lose a couple of seconds, and Bakker managed to closed the gap one time, then the gap stretched out again, but going into the final lap, Bakker closed the gap. The key section of the course was the first part, where Bakker was running whilst Alvarado was riding. Alvarado managed to stretch out a gap there, but quickly got caught by Bakker. From there on, Bakker had the forward momentum. She overtook Alvarado and powered away. She went on to take her first ever World Cup victory ahead of Alvarado. Zemanova made a lot of mistakes in the second lap as the tiredness kicked in and got overtaken by Puk Pietersen, who ended third. Zemanova needed to settle for fourth. Another Dutch rider claiming their first World Cup win in Val di Sole, Issam. Bakker, another rider who we know does well in the snow. She ended on the podium here last year, third, overtaking Persico in the final stages, but today she was on a completely different level. That technical ability she had, wow, that was great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. It was very good from her. I mean, she was, the first lap wasn't really great, but from there, really kept calm. And she said it in the post-race interview that was definitely important for her, that, she just try to stay calm and collected and don't be too eager trying to close a gap. And I don't think that from her side that she did a lot. She stayed consistent, and Alvarado just, the mistakes became more and more, and that probably had to do with the fatigue in a way. And, Bakker just kept very calm, and that eventually won her the race, not making that many mistakes. Use all the abilities that you have to your advantage and try to make sure that you stay consistent as possible. And I think that really showed today that was the winning formula. And it was a very, very strong race from Bakker. And it seems that she really loved this race, because it's not the first time that she has a good result here in Val di Sole.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're spot on there. You could see that Alvarado and Pietersen had the power. You could see that they were able to ride that first section. You might not have really been able to see it on TV. At least I struggled to see how much uphill it went on the big screen. But there were a significant amount of elevation changes there. And you could see that on the power, Alvarado and Pietersen had the upper hand. Bakker, Zemanova, McGill, they were all running there. But Pietersen and, to a lesser extent, Alvarado weren't as comfortable in the snowy conditions. When they raced, there were no ruts. The entire course was just a white carpet of snow that had fallen overnight. The ruts that were created immediately vanished as the next rider came through, taking a slightly different line. It meant that even on the straights you could make vital mistakes. We saw that Alvarado at some point messed up after the steep downhill, which led into the first pit zone. And that big straight, Zemanova powered past in the first lap because she didn't make that mistake. We saw Alvarado make that same mistake later again, which allowed Bakker to close in 4 or 5 seconds. It made it super difficult, super tricky conditions. Every little mistake on a straight could lead to a crash. And where Bakker really had that feeling, we know Bakker is a rider who is super strong, has a lot of power, does well in the mud. Bakker had that feeling. She knew how to get through those tricky conditions, whereas Alvarado had more difficulties with it. And you can only compensate for a lack of technique that long. Once the tiredness kicks in, as you said, there were more mistakes, and that's normal. But for Bakker, we have to admit as well, or we don't have to admit, we should applaud that fighting spirit, because being behind for the entire race, but keeping your head in it and not giving up and thinking, well, I should think about consolidating second place. None of that for Bakker. She was really going for it. And I mean, for her, surely this should be enough to get that contract extension at Creland Corendon. She's in her contract here as well.
Yeah, it comes at a good moment. You could see that it meant a lot for her. And I think you're spot on with the fact that you definitely need to applaud that fighting spirit, because we have seen it with the women more behind her, that it was difficult to keep your calm when you kind of feel that you can go faster. Especially on the women's side, it was a little bit more tricky, and then you start to become just that little more eager, and your heart rate obviously is racing, and you just want to take that corner just a little bit faster. You want to just do that section a little bit faster as well, and you go over the limit. And I think that for Bakker to not do that and make sure that you keep the gap as it is, and slowly but surely make your progress back to Alvarado, that was definitely fighting spirit and very, very strong from her. And I think that it was a well-deserved a victory for her, first World Cup victory for her. And yeah, it was it comes probably at a very good moment, as you said, with that, with a crucial year for her in terms of, in terms of her contract.
The battle for third, well, I don't know. Do you really consider it a battle? I would say it was, but there was one with a lot of gaps. Zemanova rode in third for a while. She was actually doing pretty well in the first part of the race. She was up there with Alvarado, even led in the first lap. Then fell back after a couple of mistakes. Couldn't keep that consistency we already talked about. Got overtaken by Pieterse, but still managed to stay in it for a while. Even Sydney McGill was in that battle for a while. Pieterse, in the end, ended third. I mean, I'd already said it, Pieterse didn't seem that comfortable on the straights, made quite a bit of mistakes, wasn't really as smooth, and you can be great technically, which she is. I mean, she's still able to bunny hop, and her cornering technique is good, but snow is completely different to the technique in a normal dry/muddy race. It really requires a different skill set. In a way, it's similar to sand. We know that Pieterse is not the greatest rider in the sand either, so it makes somewhat sense that she struggles here, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, I feel that you're going in the right direction. I think that it's, feeling for sure. And, if you look at sand, which probably, as you said, is something that is very close to what we are seeing today, I think that it's, Herreiger's one of the great specialists in the sand back in his day, and could still go on a bike and do an example ride in a sand section and do it so good and so flawless in a way. I think he said it very well. It's just, you can learn it. You can learn something like that. It's just you have to get that technique, and it's something that is kind of, it's not comparable to taking a corner well or doing a bunny hop. It's really more a feeling, and you need to understand what your bike is doing in such a moment. And I think if you look at Pieterse and how she started the race, I think that the confidence there was just gone. It was just, it was not really, she was not really feeling it, the race, the bike, the whole course. And I think that third place mainly was because of Zemanova making more and more mistakes, and also getting just a little bit more tired. And then it was more of a, the form kind of dictating the race more than the technique only. But it was still, I think, for Pieterse, it was the maximum achievable, and it was great to see that she didn't really give up, that she tried to make the best out of it, and that was great to see. But yeah, it's that's something that I really like about the course. It's just the riders need to really get out of their comfort zone and out of the elements that they kind of understand, and they have to do something which is completely atypical, and definitely not something that you really can train for. It's similar to sand riding, but as we have seen with the men's race, that Sveik didn't really have that advantage there as well. So it's a new phenomenon, and I think that the riders have to try and do as much to be as good as possible in this race. And in the end, you can do only so much, as we said before, that the circumstances, they change so much that only the difference between the women's race and the men's race was already there. So yeah, it was very tricky for the riders, and it's very hard to go at it with confidence and don't make any mistakes. And so it was, I think, in the end for Pieterse, it was still a good race, and she tried to make the best out of it, and I think that third place was very deserved.
At the same time, I wonder what mental state Pieterse is going to be in. Is this kind of where she expected to be? Not necessarily today, but ever since she returned to racing in Troyes? Or would she have hoped to... Well, she obviously would have wanted to have a win under her belt, but would she have expected to be at the level of Van Empel? Yes or no? I think that's the crucial question for where she is and where she is going to be towards the end of the season. I'm always going to be optimistic and hope that we're going to still have close races where Pieterse, Van Anrooy, and maybe Brandt/Alvarado can challenge with Van Empel for victories. But I think that's going to be interesting. I wouldn't put too much on today's race that she's beaten by Bakker and Alvarado. We shouldn't forget that Alvarado has been sick before as well. Didn't seem to impact her too much. Nevertheless, it's worth mentioning. But yeah, it will be interesting to see how Pieterse goes forward. Next week is Namur. It should be a course that suits her fairly well. So let's wait and see how she does there, and then we might get a answer to our questions, I would still like to briefly touch upon Zemanova and McGill before we run down the entire top 10. I think you already said it, Zemanova made a lot of mistakes. You can't really train for this, that's true, but Zemanova lives in the Czech Republic. There's definitely a lot more snow there. She has a lot more experience, which helps. And you could see that in her tactic of trying to go slow and steady in the first part of the race. She was not taking risks, running quite a lot, which the rest was riding. But then in the second lap, she found herself distanced behind Bakker and first Alvarado as well. And then she tried to put down the power and stepped away from that strategy of slow and steady, made mistakes and immediately fell back to Pieterse. And that's something that happened quite a bit. Rochette said it after the race, that she had a bad start, and then every time she thought, okay, I'm going to put down the power now, going to overtake these riders, she found herself on the ground. In the conditions that were here, it was just super difficult for them to move forward. Rochette ended 8th in the end. It was a bit of a disappointment for her, but at the same time, her Sydney McGill, her fellow Canadian, in 5th, great result for her, riding for Cervelo Orange Living. It's her best World Cup result. Last year she was, I think, 8th here in Val di Sole, so it's a big improvement for her, and I think she can be very happy with that result. If we look at the rest of the top 10, we have mainly Italians in the remaining spots. It was Bakker from Alvarado, Pieterse, Zemanova and McGill. 6th place for Valentina Corvi, ahead of Francesca Baroni, Magali Rochette, Sara Casasola and Katerina Heladikova. Of course, names not here, Issam, but the riders who were here, that's who we talk about. Valentina Corvi, first year U23, third race of the season, 6th place, first Italian. Wow, what a result.
Absolutely. That was something I didn't expect, to be honest, because if you would have asked me who was going to be the first Italian, I wouldn't have said Corvi most likely. And yeah, it was from the start she was on it, and she made sure that she got through the race very well, and I think it's a very a great performance from her side, and it shows that the Italians have that talent. But I just hope she's also very talented and gifted with the mountain bike. Last year junior, next year she's going to race on the 23 there. I think was European champion as well in the juniors. So that is someone with a lot of talent, great bike handling, and knows what to do on two wheels. So it's going to be interesting to see if she will continue the cyclocross in the next coming seasons, or maybe slowly but surely move to the mountain bike. But for the moment, we can enjoy her, and it's great to see such a talent, from not the typical countries go at it. I mean, obviously Italy, we see more and more Italian women up there, but if you talk about talents, most of the time we have it about the Dutch women, and sometimes we talk about the American and Canadian women. And to see also that Italy has their talent, that's always great to see.
I would also like to mention the 10th place for Katerina Heladikova, another young rider. She's a second year U23 from the Czech Republic, racing for the same team as Zemanova. It's good to see her have a good race. And yes, of course, there's riders not here, but it's a nice opportunity for us to discuss a couple of names that put their name forward. And whilst we're at the Czech riders, I really hope there's going to be one of the bigger teams that are interested in Zemanova. I mean, it's no coincidence, these results. It's been great week after week. It's 8th in Dublin, 6th in Dendermonde, 4th here, 3rd at the U23 European Championships, medaled at Worlds U23 last year, 10th in Maasmechelen. Really, really good season. She hasn't missed a single top 10. No, she did. She was just outside of the top 10 in Troyes. But for the rest, she has, I think that makes 4 top 10s out of 5 World Cups she's done. That's an impressive campaign by her, so I think it definitely deserves a step up. Then let's take a look at some of the racing in the rest of Europe and the world. The Coupe de France took place in Flamanville. They had their final weekend there. Yesterday on Saturday, Joshua Dubois took the win ahead of Tony Perroux and David Menu. Today the podium was the same. Joshua Dubois ahead of Tony Perroux and David Menu. The women's race on Saturday was won by Helene Clausel ahead of Amandie Foucounet and Camille Divan. And today the podium in the women's race was Amandine Foucounet ahead of Helene Clausel and Anne Morichon. There was also racing in Poland today in Ziolana, where Marek Konwa took the win ahead of Matthijs Ruijs and Michael Paluta. The women's race was won by Zuzana Kristalla ahead of Antonia Bialek and Joyce van der Beke. Yesterday, the exact cross in Belgium, where Wout van Aert took the win ahead of Jens Adams and Thijs Aerts, as Issam told you. The women's race was won by Marion Norbert-Ribeiro ahead of Aniek van Alphen and Laura Verdonschot. There was also racing in the Czech Republic in Vesy nad Luzinci, where the final round of the Toy to Toy Cup took place. Pavel Jindřich took the win in snowy conditions ahead of Marek Konva and Matthias Fiala. Sofia Ungerova won the women's race ahead of Victoria Gladonova and Amalie Kotwaldova. The fifth and penultimate round of the UK National Trophy Series took place in Gravesend, where Ben Chilton won ahead of Toby Barnes and Thomas Mean. Xan Kreese won the women's race ahead of Elena Day and Isla Short. There was racing in Spain in Tarzona, where Felipe Orts took the win. He beat a young Spanish rider, Raúl Mira Bonsartre, just 19 years old, in second, and Mario San Milan in the third there. The women's elite race was won by Lucia González Blanco ahead of Irena Bragado and Alba Ribes. Just before Val di Sole on Friday, there was Cyclocross del Ponte. It's a national holiday in Italy. That's why that race is taking place, where Filippo Fontana took the win ahead of Corné van Kessel and Filippo Agostinaccio. The women's race was won by Sara Casasola ahead of Cristina Zemanova and Francesca Beroni. And then to complete this episode, there was also racing in Rukve. That race took place on Thursday night. The race returned. It used to host a World Cup. It couldn't financially do that, took a sabbatical last year, but they were back this year. Ryan Kamp took the win there ahead of Thijs Aerts and Mees Hendricks. The women elite race was won by Laura Verdonschot ahead of Julia Kopecky and Lauren Molengraaf. The results from the American National Championships are not in. They are taking place tonight, European time. Should be a title for, well, at least my predictions are titles for Clara Honsinger and Eric Brunner. It's of course not a given that it goes that way, but we will see there. Issam, thank you for being here to discuss the Val di Sole and your experiences from Essen.
Yes, thank you for having me.
We will be back later this week when we are going to record a midweek podcast ahead of the double weekend Herentals Namur next week. Thanks for listening, everyone, and goodbye.